So for those of you who don't know me, this is our first video. My name is Itai Sharfi. I am an adjunct professor at Cal State Fulton, where I'm teaching software management course. I'm also a senior product manager at Google. And in this session, this is the first video, and thank you so much, Vikram, for agreeing to participate. I would like to just share from people in the industry that have been in the industry and quite experienced, what some career opportunities, how do they look like? What does it mean to be a software engineer, and we'll go in the future to like DevOps and other types of role. And I hope that people can benefit from that, benefit to know what the opportunities are, how things are like. Some of the people that I'll be interviewing, like Vikram, are quite senior, so I think it will give you a glimpse about the journey that they had. So for people looking to change or also early in their career, maybe students, that could be quite beneficial. And maybe a good place to start is, Vikram, how do we know each other?
Yeah. So happy to be on this call and like happy to chat with you about my journey and the state of software engineering and like the software jobs. So like happy to chat with you. So yeah, like I'm working right now with Adobe for the past little more than 6 years now. Before that, I used to work in a company called Risk Management Solutions, and that's where I met Ite. We worked on a product which was, we were trying to come up with a software as a service platform for the insurance industry. So we were trying to like build that from ground up. We did quite a lot of exciting work together until 2016. I think that's when I left that company, and that's how I know Ite from that opportunity.
Yeah, and this is the first video, the first person I thought of, but I remember very favorably working before Google. You were a tech lead manager back then, and I enjoyed working together. So you're the first person that is invited, and the first person that will help me practice my interview skill, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm honored.
Let's talk about maybe what you're currently doing. What do you do today? So if you can share with us, what is your current position, or what do you do today?
Yeah, so I'm working at Adobe for the past 6 years as a director of engineering. I manage a few organizations which are into like software engineering, and we develop software for a Adobe product which is called as Adobe Journey Optimizers, where we help our customers manage their communications with their clients. So that's what the role is. And I have quite a big team of like engineers, SREs, a few QE folks and things like that. And we work closely with like product managers to develop like new features and new products in this, like the marketing cloud. So it's a marketing tech solution, which is like companies use our platform to help market their products better to their clients and give out information to their customers. So that is what the work is. And what I do there is like my day-to-day job is being a director there. Like my role involves primarily like deciding things like what are the kinds of features and like what are the kinds of product enhancements that my teams need to come up with, that they get to work on what we call as the road mapping process, which is we decide the product roadmap for the next quarter, next year, and then we execute on that roadmap. So a lot of my time is spent on doing that sort of like road mapping process. A lot of like I'm responsible for a lot of delivery of like these features and services and things like that. So my time is spent in a lot of coordination across the different teams. Controlling the risk is, I think, one of the things that I need to do. Apart from that, since we have quite a big team, there is a lot of hiring that goes on all around the year. So there is a lot of like interviews and getting the right people, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about people, right? Like getting the right people to do the right kind of work. That's how products get built. So a lot of my time is spent in looking at hiring, the hiring processes and things like that. Also a lot of time is spent in coaching and like building relationships with the team, with my peers, with the different parts of the company, to make sure that we have a smooth process of developing these products. And the third thing is what I would say is doing things like design reviews and architectural reviews, and a lot of like I have almost like 18, 19 years of experience in software development. So over time, I mean, I have seen a lot of different kinds of systems being developed. And as the team needs my opinions about like architectural decisions, design decisions, a lot of that time is spent in exploring those, helping the teams with those sort of like decision making. And lastly, I would say is there is a lot of learning, right? Like, because there is a lot of new things which keep coming all the time, and you have to keep up with like all the things like chat gpt being the latest one, like generational ai, things like that, right? You have to keep up because you have to keep utilizing all those newer things which are coming in to make your the things that you're developing better. So yeah.
Well, no comment on the ChatGPT. Something I'm interested is on, you mentioned like what you do today, your daily work. That sounds quite different than maybe a software engineer, what they will do as an individual contributor.
Yeah.
How did you learn to do that? Like, is that something that you learned on the job, or have you got any formal education or mentorship, or what was helpful to you?
Yeah, so I mean, even I started as a software engineer like back in early 2000s, and slowly, like as the responsibilities came on, uh, I started to like take on more like tech lead and manager sort of responsibilities to like manage a small team. And then that slowly transitioned into like managing managers and managing senior managers and that sort of thing, right? So it was sort of a gradual change of responsibilities that came along. And I think across, I mean, all these journeys, the core of it is really like software development, right? So like software engineering, like that is something that you cannot leave, right? So that you have to, as and when like you get a chance in your initial years to be like a really good software engineer and build really good software, that you have to like continue to do. And on top of this, I think these are some of the skills that you just, if you are in the right company with the right set of people, if you get to work with smart people, and there is sort of this growth mindset within the teams and the people that you work on, then I think like these are sort of the things that you learn as you like grow the teams, grow the product. And that's how I learned some of these things. I also like did in back in 2015, I did like a small, it was sort of a mini MBA, which was there, which I wanted to do a full MBA at the time, but I mean, it was a lot of time commitment. But then instead I did this like certification, a management certification course from UC Berkeley. And that sort of like I wanted to get a taste of like, so far my formal education was all in like software engineering and computer science, right? And I wanted to get a taste of like how do other things within the company work, like HR and marketing and finance and like all these things. So I was like very curious about that, so I did that courses, and that helped me just get a more all-round knowledge about like how a company works and how it runs, right? So yeah.
And you've been doing that for multiple years now. So maybe let me ask you, what do you enjoy about your work? What is the part that you try to do more of, if possible?
Yeah, so like what I enjoy is like first is we develop these software components which are being used by like millions of people across the world, right? So like that is a very satisfying thing to know that like whatever you are trying to build and as a team, like what you are shipping on a day-to-day basis, is being used by a lot of people and it's changing lives per se, right? Like they are using it to make some of their customer experiences better, and like that is helping them reach out to their customers better. And in general, like it's a good thing, right? So like that's one thing which is like very satisfying. I think the other thing is like as you get into like a role like mine where you're responsible for like a lot of people's careers and you're responsible for like helping them grow, like seeing that sort of growth within people is very like satisfying to me. So like instead of like as an individual contributor, you are like primarily focused on like what you are able to deliver and how you are able to grow, but that changes from like tech lead to a manager, like that sort of changes to being focused on the growth of the people that you work with. So like it's very satisfying for me to like see people excel in their careers, do good, and like continue to grow and like build up that sort of like relationships with their uh, the people that they work with. So that is very satisfying. And yeah, I think like that's the main things that are good about the job.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that even from the RMS days. That's something you were quite passionate about. So, now you are a director at a well-branded company with a large group and a lot of exciting work ahead of you in a very interesting industry, one I know quite familiar with. And some of the listeners might be students, just
Mhm.
early in their career.
Yeah,
So one thing, maybe I'll ask you a couple of questions, just how you got to where you are today. And
yeah,
yeah, people can kind of get inspired. So maybe start with the beginning. Was
yeah.
computer science your first choice? What about like a doctor or something else? What brought you into computer science?
Yeah. So this was like way back in the late 90s, right? Like when computers were, at least like I came from India. So I moved to United States in 2006. I came here for my master's degree. But like before that, like when I was in my like 10th grade and when the time came to like choose between like whether you do science or whether you go to like things like finance or like those sort of career choices at that time, I think like for me, like my parents had a publishing business, so that's why like in my early school years they had got a desktop computer. And like at that time it was like, at least in India, it wasn't like very common in like the 90s. It wasn't very common to like have a computer in your house. But I think like that was a game changer for me. I think like that's when I got very familiar with like computers. Started I think for most of the people it starts with games. So I got into like a lot of like computer gaming and things like that, and then that passion turned into like programming. So in my early years, like I started doing C and like C++ programming. And like at that time, I think like it was very clear to me that like engineering and computer science is something that I want to make my career in. And at that time, I think it was also a booming stream at that time. Like computer science engineers were in quite a lot of demand. This was the time of Y2K, like in 2000. So like there was a lot of demand for like computer engineers and things like that. So I picked up computer science engineering. I did my engineering in India. Then after that, I worked for a couple of years in India as a software engineer in a telecom company. And then after that, I decided to move to US for doing my master's. The primary reason for doing that was like I was interested in things like data mining and artificial intelligence and those sort of things. Like I had done a little bit of those in my bachelor's studies, but then it wasn't in like that much amount of depth. So then to take that up, and like in US, the opportunities were quite big, right, in terms of like computer science. And like a lot of product companies at the time, like Microsoft was quite popular, where they were Google was like just getting started at the time. And like it was like clear to me that at the time, like even back in India, there were companies which were there, but those were primarily like service-based companies, which were like companies like Infosys and TCS, which used to provide software engineering services to the companies primarily in US and Europe, but they didn't use to actually create products. And it was clear to me that like developing products was like something which was of interest to me, and that was the primary reason that I decided to like take up my master's. So I picked the Texas Tech University to do my master's. I picked that primarily for two reasons. The program that they had was good, and also I had gotten a research assistantship, which was taking the burden, the financial burden of my like tuitions and things like that quite a lot. So I had picked that school. And yeah, unfortunately, I really like got a very good advisor, and uh, my like I was the research assistant to a professor there for 2 years, and they helped me like figure this field out quite a lot. And I got to do like research papers, I got to like present at conferences, and that like helped me with building the confidence and like with presenting. We used to have we used to like present papers like every other week to a group of people in that. So like got that exposure quite a lot of like early on, where of like presenting to like people and talking about technology and things like that. So that helped me quite a lot. And then after that, I joined, like my first job out of my master's was at MySpace in LA. So MySpace was big at the time. Like Facebook wasn't that popular. So this was in like early 2008. And MySpace was like one of the, after Google, it used to get the largest amount of traffic at the time. Unfortunately, I got into MySpace. I was in the infrastructure team there. So what I was involved in writing was writing caching solutions, writing NoSQL databases. So NoSQL databases like MongoDB weren't around at that time. So we had to actually write one from scratch at MySpace. And that was something that I was involved in. So yeah, it was a very enriching experience early on. So like very core technology experience. I got to work with like really smart engineers, smart architects, and that was sort of like the place where I got the right coding habits, coding hygiene, things like that. The importance of writing good code was like embedded in me because of like that MySpace experience. After that, I moved to the Bay Area in 2011. I joined the company for risk management solutions. They were moving from, so what brought me to RMS is like, they were basically, they used to ship CDs of software to their customers prior to 2011. And they wanted to move everything to cloud and make this big new shiny platform, which was software as a service. It was very promising, and they had huge amount of data that was to be dealt there, and that was something which was very exciting for me. So I joined there. I was there for almost 5 years or so. We built a lot of cool things there. I learned immensely there, a lot of new things. And then after that, I joined this company called TubeMogul in 2016, which was an ad tech company in different domains. Typically, I mean, when I change companies, I like to pick like domains which are like in a completely different area that I've worked on, so that I get totally like new experiences. So I picked ad tech there, and then I worked at that company, which got acquired by Adobe in 2016. And then since then, I've been part of Adobe. And yeah, I mean, at Adobe, like Adobe is a great company. I have changed teams from like ad tech to another like new domain, which is in the same like marketing realm, but it's tackling some totally like different problems like emails, SMS, and push notifications and things like that. So yeah, so I mean, that has been my journey so far, and it has been quite exciting. And along the way, yeah, I mean, got to work with really smart people, and I've enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And You were hired, as you mentioned, the first position you had in the US after university was MySpace.
Mhm.
MySpace, some of the people might be young, but it was huge back then. Huge.
Mhm.
It was like I know, the Facebook when Facebook was in its peak there.
Yeah.
And, that's quite an achievement of getting hired to that straight out of school where your experience was not US based and
Yeah.
potentially under consideration in regards to your first position.
Right.
Uh, how did you manage to get that? Like, what have you learned about kind of getting hired straight up to infrastructure team at one of the most kind of well-known branded company back in the days?
Yeah. 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 So I think like I think the interview process was pretty much, I think it hasn't changed in like all these years from like what I've seen for the most part. Like it has always focused on like things like data structures and algorithms and system design. So like since quite a long time, like it hasn't changed. And it was same back then. I mean, it was a little bit more like focused on the languages and things like that, which I believe, I mean, in some companies it is still that way. But I think like the key, and you have to prepare quite a lot for like those sort of interviews, right? So I think like it's one thing to like know about these things, about like these technologies, and to know about data structures and algorithm, and it's a totally different thing to like do well in interviews, right? So in my opinion, like those are really two different things. You have to prepare. There is a certain format in which you have to prepare. There is a certain way in which you have to go about it. You have to practice a lot to like give those sort of interviews. You have to practice doing algorithm questions. There is a time constraint, right? Typically these interviews are like for 40-45 minutes. You have to prepare for them a lot. You have to prepare coding questions. You have to practice system design. You have to learn to like how to present yourself and things like that. So, and that is the sort of like preparation I spent, I believe, a good 2-3 months of time towards like end of my master's program to like dedicate it to just like preparation for these. You give some practice interviews, you don't do like well in. I remember like not doing well in like the initial set of interviews that I had given with some of the other companies, and then you sort of like learn from those experiences and then you do better. And it's also, I mean, at the end of the day, it's also luck, right? It's like you happen to be in the right spot, you happen to get the right interviewer. But I think like with preparation you can reduce the amount of luck that plays the role in all of this process, right? So I think like that's the way that I went about it, and that has worked for me so far. And that is what I would like recommend your students to go about it. Like look at, there are nowadays, I mean, there is like plenty of forums and like plenty of tools. There is like things like Leith Code and Hacker Rank and lots of, but back in the day, I mean, those sort of preparation tools were not there. It's like, but at the same time, I mean, with this preparation tools, the amount of things that you have to learn and prepare for has increased a lot. But, and I think like the other thing that is important is to give attention to basics, right? Like get the basics of like data structures, algorithm, operating systems, things like that. Like when you study these topics or like these courses in your bachelor's or your master's program, you have to really like get to the basics and get these very much right. You have to like get, I think, good at at least one programming language very well, right? It can be anyone, like it can be Python or it can be Java, Scala, anyone which you, but you have to learn that one programming language really well, so that then like learning the other programming languages, it becomes much easier, because then you can start mapping out. And I think like one more important thing is that like especially for when you don't have a lot of experience to show on your resume, right? It's important to if you have side projects, if you have taken part in hackathons or like things like that, right? Those go a long way, because then that sort of shows the companies that you are interested not just in like doing your curriculum or like what is expected of you, but you're going out of the way and you're taking some of these like efforts to like show your interest in like writing code and like building products and things like that, right? And there are a lot of like new things that you can. So I would like highly recommend computer science engineers especially to like participate in these sort of events and try to like build small, even if these are like small products, try to build like products from the ground up. So like that's what is going to help. And I think at the last thing I would say is like have a very can do attitude, right? Like be cheerful, like have that sort of the right mindset all the time. And if you are able to like show that sort of, that's what companies are looking to hire for, like where they can get people who can like just have the right attitude, and they can like, given any responsibility, even if they don't know about it, just say yes and then figure out a way to do it, right? Like have that sort of attitude is what I would say.
Yeah, those are all good advices. One thing that maybe to re-emphasize is what you mentioned about interviewing. Interviewing is quite different than a daily work. So even if a person has experience, they need to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a skill to be learned. It's not something that people like are born with. So
Yeah.
it's always good to know that. Now, interviewing is one part. So let's assume that looking into your experience, how did you pick which companies you want to go to? So I would assume that if you have MySpace, you had a couple of other opportunities. I assume you had other opportunities when you come to RMS, when you went to Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pick? Like, do you pick by the, I don't know, the brand of the company, by the manager, by the project, by the technology, by money, by there are many criteria. What is important for you? What was important for you when you
Yeah,
picking?
I would say all of the above, like what you said. But I think, yeah, like some of the things would be like it changes, right? Like when you're initially like you're looking for job, like when you're like fresh graduate, at that time, it's like if you happen to be like fortunate to have like multiple offers that you can choose from, then I think like the things that I have looked for is like the culture of the team and the culture of the company that you know about and that you get a sense of from the interviews. Like how are they talking to you, like what sort of questions they are asking, and like what sort of, you sort of get that sort of vibe of the company, of the culture, like what is their engineering culture and like things like that, right? So I think like for me, like that culture has been a very important factor. The second thing is like the growth, the growth opportunities, right? Like if the company and if the product is in a position that you are about to join where like there is an inherent growth potential, then you tend to grow a lot with the company, right? Like you ideally want to be in that sort of space, right, where there is like immense, like imagine like joining, let's say like Uber at the very beginning of it, right? Like it growed immensely, and then you would get a lot of opportunities, right? Like the sky is the limit in those sort of cases. So try to pick like opportunities where there is a lot of growth potential, at least initially, like that thing is very important, so that you get a lot of exposure, you get a lot of different opportunities to like explore and show your potential, right? I think like those things are there. I think pay and these sort of things, like if you are really good at like what you do, right? Like I think like I have been a firm believer like that other things like pay and money, like that typically follows, right? Like you will get in the company of right people, you will get the right products to work on, they will grow and you will grow with the company, and those things fall in place, right? So I would say, I mean, focus on like these sort of things where the growth, the kinds of opportunities, the technology, like are you working on like the latest set of technologies and those sort of things. Those are important things, right? Like if you are working on like very old technologies which are not used outside, then you're developing skill sets which are like not very valuable in the market, right? So you have to be always, I think like somebody like early on in my career, they had given me advice that you have to like, even if you are not planning to change the jobs, you should always be in a mode of like interviewing. Like every few years, keep interviewing. So even if you like try to just do interviews so that you come to know like what's your value, right? Like so that's something that you should like keep doing. But I would say, yeah, I mean, like these are some of the things that you should look for in the companies that you are trying to join.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes lots of sense. Let me ask you about the expertise that you picked. So, or picking expertise. So the expertise that you picked was mostly around platform. You mentioned NoSQL, so platform, databases.
Mhm.
Other expertise like um, front-end development, that's just
Yeah.
one. Maybe apps, that's another one. How do you how you thought about picking expertise, and does that matter to pick expertise early on in your career? And what are you committing yourself to? And maybe how to think about that?
Yeah. So as you have mentioned, like there is, if you just look at the landscape as you have mentioned, there is backend engineering. That backend engineering is, I would say, I think like 60-70% of the engineers, like, it's like I don't have the stats, but a lot of people actually work on the backend portion of it, right? Because a lot of code that goes on is in the backend side of things, on like databases and building services and things like that, right? So that's one area. Front end engineering, like you mentioned, there is web engineering, which is writing like websites and like doing the web side of the code, like the browser side of the code, and then there is apps, right? So that's also an area. Then there is the fourth area is doing things like system engineering, which is doing DevOps and managing systems and going into like the heart of like operating systems and managing those and networking and managing databases, like those sort of things is another area. And I think the fourth one, which is sort of, I mean, which has been declining, I would say, is the quality engineering, where a lot of companies now have. Earlier, I mean, we used to have like quality engineers as a separate role and development engineers as a separate role. But in a lot of leading companies, like those roles have merged, and developers are now expected to do all the quality work as well, because like quality, and the point being like quality is inherently part of the development, right? So that I don't consider it as a separate role anymore. So looking at these three, like since I got into, like, all my experience always has been in the backend engineering side of things, then like naturally I got opportunities and I got to work on all similar set of opportunities. But I mean, there is definitely, like, once you, and there is also like full stack engineering which exists in some of the places where you have small enough components where you develop the backend and the front end, both the things. So like, if it is possible, like my advice would be to, all these are like very rich areas to develop your careers, and you can pretty much like start in like one of these areas and you can pretty much like retire in being expert in one of these areas, right? And like there is no good or bad like within these areas. It's really about like your liking and your inclination, in like which portions you are passionate about. Like some people are really passionate about, like I have friends who are like really good at app development, and they just keep getting better and better at it, and they just are in that area, right? Sometimes you're in backend. What I would say is that, I mean, with backend engineering is much more wider, because then that you get into like a lot of like Hadoop processing and Spark and like those like big data technologies, all those fall under the backend engineering part of it. So if you are interested in like very high scale and like developing distributed systems and things like that, then that is a backend engineering area. If you're interested in building like really cool interfaces and things like that, there is a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities in that area as well. Uh, React and things like that, and Angular and those sort of things. And app development is always a green area too. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say like one is better than the other, but you have to just see where your inclination is. In the beginning, I mean, you should explore all of these and then pick, is what I would say. Like you shouldn't like just go in one area. You should do initially you should do try to do development in your school in all these areas, and then pick the one that you like.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe as we're talking about known technologies, let's talk about maybe branded companies.
Mhm.
So when certain professions require like certain brands, maybe an easy example for that is a doctor. What about software engineering. So how much of a brand that a person work for certain well-known companies, in your case, MySpace,
Yeah.
serve them versus if it was the same work in a not well-known company?
Yeah. So I think like it goes both ways. I think like there is definitely an advantage if you have a branded company on your resume uh, initially, or like in any point of your career. If you have a branded company, then the subsequent jobs that you apply for, you tend to uh, typically, like across the industry, it's well known like how some of these bigger companies operate and how good they are in some of these fields, and like what sort of interview processes they have and things like that. So like with that, there is sort of a stamp that comes with these branded companies. Like that's the advantage of having one of these like bigger companies on your resume. Gets you, it becomes easier for you to get calls on interviews and get your resume selected. But I think like it pretty much stops there, because like after that, like once the resume is in the hands of the hiring manager and once you're invited for an interview, beyond that point, like it doesn't serve any good, because then you have to perform in the interviews, you have to do good, and you have to like impress them so that you get hired, right? I mean that goes one. I think like one disadvantage that I would say that sometimes it's is applicable with these bigger companies is that the bigger companies tend to have a lot of processes, and there is a certain style in which software is developed at these companies, right? Versus the same processes, there is a lack of these sort of processes at smaller companies, at startups. uh, so with that, I mean, with that sort of independence, there is the pace at which the software is developed is definitely, in my opinion, is different at bigger companies versus smaller companies, right? So the smaller company startup, you tend to learn a lot than what you would learn at these bigger companies. But it's a trade-off, right? I mean, it's a trade-off, because then there is inherent risk of like losing the job, or like that startup not doing well and things like that. That comes with like smaller companies. You have much more stability with the bigger companies. So I would say, yeah, I mean, like uh at least initially, like don't I would say, like don't be picky about like where you're going. You should look for like the work that you will be doing, the things that you are like focus on learning initially, is what my advice will be, and the other things would come. But like, yeah, like if you have like a 20-year career, then having like some branded company, like getting that experience is also like valuable. Like get that experience for yourself and decide if it's for you or if it's not for you, if it suits you or not. And then uh yeah, like that would be my advice.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned, maybe to ask about this, is you mentioned culture.
Mhm.
So it's something that's quite important for you. So when you say, what does it mean for your culture, and how do you know if it's good or not? How do you know before, and how do you know then when you're in the company?
Yeah. So I think like the culture is like very the definition of culture is a bit hard to put in words, but I mean, I would say like that how people treat each other, how things get done, like what is the process of getting things done, like how do people collaborate with each other, like I mean, how do they interact with each other to get something done. Like that is sort of like what is the value system for that company or for that like organization, like what are the main values that they live and die uh, to like get their products out, right? I think that is what the definition of the culture is for me. And like how do you, so there is like there is engineering culture and there is a general culture, right? I mean, engineering culture is things like code hygiene, like what is the process of like from just talking about a concept and putting that concept in front of users, like how does that idea go from an idea to be in an actual deliverable software, like how, what is that process, like that defines your engineering culture. And the normal culture is, yeah, like what is the mission statement and like how does the yeah, like what is the value system for the company and things like that. So I think like the ways to at least like being in my position, like the ways, some of the ways that I would uh look to evaluate the culture is, one thing is like retention, right? Like how long are the people staying in a certain company, or like is there a lot of churn? If the people are just like coming and going in like a less than a year or something, then there is definitely something wrong. Like if people are not sticking around a lot, then there is something wrong with the culture typically, right, with the company. Second thing is like your success in hiring and recruiting. Like if you are in a managerial or I mean as a team, like if you're trying to like hire someone, like if you are able to like hire someone easily, then that means you are doing something right with your culture, right? Because then people are getting attracted to you, they're getting hired and things like that, right? So, and I think ultimately, like, is your team delivering results or not? Like that is also like, are you able to like decide on something, and are you able to deliver those projects and results? Like that defines the culture in my mind.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe two questions before we wrap up. And the first question is about hiring. So you're now at Adobe, and um, I understand that you're hiring, and at the time of layoffs
Yeah.
in tech space in general, it's quite good to know that. For those that listen and want to know, what are you hiring for? What are you looking for? What are some things that are currently open and you would like to share?
Yeah, so I'm looking for primarily for like big data and distributed systems engineers. So as I said, like my teams are all backend teams, and I'm looking to hire at least 3 to 4 more people. Little bit on the experience side, but in general, Adobe is also like looking for fresh candidates and interns, and there are, you can go to Adobe's career websites, and there are lots of these opportunities listed. So Adobe is actually very big on like intern hiring and having like a fresh graduate hiring. They go to a lot of these universities. There are a lot of us like gets fresh graduates every year, and so yeah, I mean there are definitely those opportunities. I'm particularly looking for a little bit more experienced candidates in the distributed systems and big data area, like at least like 3 to 4 years of experience is what I'm looking for.
Cool. And maybe if you were not an engineer in a parallel universe,
Yeah.
and like what's going to be like your second choice?
Yeah, like if I wasn't an engineer, I think I would have been doing something in finance. I think I've always been like fascinated with finance, and a lot of people in my family have been in that finance background. So like I would imagine, I think myself being probably a CPA or like an MBA in finance, or something to do with maybe like investment banking or something like that. Like finance has always like fascinated me, the kind of impact that finance has and on everyone, and the way it runs the whole world, right? So that is, I think, yeah, that is, I think, what that would have been.
That's pretty cool. Thank you very much, Vikram. I enjoyed our conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope that our listeners also took off some of your advices. I think they were great, and I'm glad to meet you again.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Yes.